Welcome back to Studio Z. We have another episode today. I'm delighted to be joined by my friend Vivek Sharma. Vivek, say hi to the audience and introduce yourself.
Hello, great to be here and lots of gratitude. I know it's Thanksgiving week, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to reveal that? Anyway, yeah, it's the day before Thanksgiving, but it's not live.
Yeah, behind the curtains, that's right.
Tell us a little bit about yourself then. What do you do? How did you get there?
So very quick history. I started as a PM intern at Microsoft, loved it, came back PM full-time. I spent 16 years at Microsoft, worked on a lot of stuff, Office 365. I accidentally became an engineer through the way, graduated as a distinguished engineer, left to Meta, reset everything, went back to IC, and then grew from there working on Marketplace, Facebook Gaming, and most recently the Horizon work in Metaverse. Left as a VP, came to Stripe the last year and a half, and am learning all about all kinds of ways that money moves through the world, but also helping businesses thrive.
Awesome. So, we love talking about product and engineering excellence here, engineering culture. You're sort of a product manager by trade, it sounds like.
Yep.
But we got to dig into this distinguished engineer thing a little.
Yep.
So from my perspective, remember when I joined Microsoft, there was these two titles that were like the Knights of the Round Table or something. Like you know the ones I'm going for. The distinguished engineer and then the technical fellow. Very, very cool. How did you become a DE, which was the short term, as a PM? Were you the first to do that? Or?
Yeah, so I think I was the first, and it was not intentional. I think Microsoft, one thing it does really well is helps recognize people in many different ways. One of them is individual excellence. Sometimes you become a manager at Microsoft. There's also levels and comp and everything else that's like behind the scenery. But I think what I really appreciate about Microsoft is a recognition that you can have impact in a discipline that stretches far into the technical realm. And so that's what that was about. And it was mostly because we ended up creating Office 365 from scratch when there wasn't a lot of prior art that existed in enterprise and B2B software on how to run services. If you recall, around that time, it was Google was the big company doing data center stuff, and their model was radically different. And consumer services, which are not about data residency, they're not about the special requirements of enterprises, one giant data center serving the entire world type of thing, of course, redundancy and stuff, and some details. And going radically to a world where Microsoft changed everything almost in its operating model, business model, and technology to address what has now become probably the biggest cloud in the world.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why.
Interesting. It's probably underappreciated, that switch, actually. Just how big a change that was for a company.
I think you end up forgetting how institutionally large these changes can become, right?
Yeah.
And so the secular change of movement to the cloud probably unlocked more value for Microsoft than most anything else. Yeah.
So the first time, even though we overlapped at Microsoft, we never met. I didn't have too much interactions with the Office team. Thank you. I don't think so. But the first time I met you was at Meta. And so we have a lot of shared culture there, obviously. You are friends with, and he said I could say this, have just hired Josh Williams, who was the first sort of the inception of this whole show when we did our Facebook posters series. Worked closely with VJ as well, who's been on here, and Rajiv, who obviously set you up for this, this adventure.
It's hard to turn it down when somebody endorses.
Thanks, Rajiv. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
And so I thought we'd start with a very simple one for you. So let's do the Facebook posters thing. What was your favorite Facebook poster and why?
So many. I don't know if the folks in your community know this, but Facebook has a tradition of not just having one value. When you start in your bootcamp class, one of the first things you do is to create a poster that you believe represents what Facebook is all about. So it's plastered everywhere. But one that I really admire and liked, I saw about midway through my tenure at Facebook, which is. It came from the ads organization. I think you were in the ads.
I was in ads for a while, yeah.
It was from Boz, an amazing leader. Be plain spoken. And actually, I think more than all of the other ones, it represents some of the tension that comes with operating at a very large company and building software and services for billions of people. Is that really, really easy to get lost in the technical or the product or the business or the marketing of the thing, but then forget about what it actually means for the people you serve. And so be plain spoken. I think I remember Boz and many others bringing that up clearly, because it was like articulate things the way that people who are going to use the software or use your services would understand it, and use that as a mechanism for building the right thing or to make the right decisions. And so I found that to be very, very powerful. And still to this day, I find that to be one of the best learnings I had from Meta.
That is a good one, and it's one that we've never talked about before, actually. You're making me think we should almost do an episode just on Boz. I mean, we can't get him on, I doubt, but,
maybe.
We'll try. We'll build up to that, right? He was definitely one of the most impressive leaders. Just one example was, I remember my first review with Boz, and he had these rules before that, about not piling on. It was like the 5 Ps or something, if you remember that.
Yep.
And at first, I remember thinking it was terrifying because it was quite strict doctrine of like, your slides will be no more than 1 per 2 minutes or something like that. You will number all the slides. You will limit the number of people in the room.
I remember that.
It made me a little bit scared. I was like, why is this like so set up this way? But it turned out to be brilliant. It was really about making sure, because what happens in a review, you're on slide 2, everybody in the room speaking up.
That's right.
Wait till I get to slide 4. His whole goal was let the people talk, get through it, and then we'll do the questions at the end. And so I need to know how you're making progress through your slide. Just all of this attention to detail and thought on how to run an excellent review. And it was the best I've ever.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I think the deeper insight is like, it's really easy to get lost and focus on the wrong thing. And so creating the guardrails that prevent you from doing that, I think is like a really important management. Management is like, the big M tool.
Yeah.
But I think it's like to your point of culture. In culture, if you can do that without having to write the rules down, boy, that's magic.
So inspiration there for another whole episode on his rules of a review. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was, so aside the posters, there are also these famous notes. Rabkin did one about awkward meetings.
Yeah, that was a good one. Comes from the heart, that one, I think.
Ami Vora did a few really famous ones, I think. Was she the author of Make the Other Mistake, I think?
I think that was Rabkin.
Was that Rabkin as well?
Rabkin, yeah.
The one about sort of career progression and getting uncomfortable on that like step function.
Yep.
Have you got a particular favorite?
I do. Give away your Legos is the one. I think by the time maybe you and I we're at Meta, maybe that was a little bit more ancient history, but that I think originated when Facebook was scaling really, really fast and things were so chaotic that people were having a very hard time dealing with the number of changes. And one of the most profound changes you can have is when you've settled in, you have a grasp of something, a domain. If you're an engineer, you have code, like your code. If you're a PM, you have like your product. If you're a GM, you have like your business.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happens in like very fast moving or fast changing environments is that like you naturally end up in a place where the change that is happening all around you will shift the ground underneath your feet.
Yep.
And so in reaction to that, the very human reaction is to be like, I want to hold on to it.
Yeah.
Because this is me. My identity is built off the scope that I have.
Yeah.
Or the code that I own, or the product that I built. But the truth is, in a rapid scaling startup or a rapid scaling company or a rapid growing company, it's actually more important for you to think about what does it mean for the company as a whole and the construct of the company as a whole. And so this note was about actually one of the best things you can do is to give away your Legos. Share your toys. Actually, give away your toys because you don't know what you'll be asked to go do instead. And if you just keep hoarding, you will only be the Lego car builder. And that's fine, but maybe the company needs something that's more than that. Maybe it needs to build a rocket ship.
Yeah.
Well, how can you do that? Well, you got to get new Legos, you got to give some away, you got to like share some people's, motivations and energy that you maybe didn't think. One of the things I think that's like remarkable about that philosophy is that it works, even though I mentioned this in terms of like rapid scale and rapid growth, it works for like aged companies too.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
Because if you think about philosophically, shifting talent, shifting resources, it just makes the company stronger and more adaptable. So that one I thought to be like a fabulous like cultural note.
I love not only I think one of the things Facebook did really well is it didn't just have like good cultural ideals, it found really nice ways of presenting them, like give away your Legos. It's so like evocative, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. And the truth is you grow more out of it. One of having mentioned that, one of the smartest pieces of advice that I ever got at Microsoft was when reorg, there was like this massive reorg, and I of course, quote unquote, lost a bunch of stuff in the reorg. And I was like moping a little bit. You mope. Moping is allowed in your career. And a very, this leader that I worked for many years, name is Perry Clark, he gave me this great advice. He was like, hey, you know how there's people who just gather things and they like hold it all together? You know what doesn't happen with them? I was like, what? It's like people tend to not give them new stuff to work on. I was like, why? Because they're just full. And so it's like, the trade-off is you hold on to this stuff so much and you like admire this stuff, you'll probably miss out on an opportunity for net new things that happen, and especially in the tech industry.
Yeah.
And so like you often will find yourself in a bind where like, okay, well, I just keep working on the thing I know, but if I want to do new interesting things, I got to let go.
Got it.
And that changed my perspective, and honestly, it unlocked a lot of personal growth because, keeping yourself energized is actually one of the most important things in your career. And so like give away your Legos, get new projects,
go and find a new toy.
New toy. Yeah. Boy, it just like, it's so great. So that I recommend that one to everybody, no matter where I go.
Okay, I like it. Another one that's not come up today. So thank you. That's great. There's one little thing I want to pick on though. Like one observation I think I've seen when I joined Facebook was early 2016. I think a year or two before you. And there was this, still this sense of it being this amazing culture, a very special place. I think it was when we left, but there was a sense that this can't last forever, and people talked about it, and it was kind of openly talked about that. Yeah, it's a question of how long we can stay off getting bigger and slower and more infighting, or more political is a word that's often used, right?
Yeah.
And one theory of this is that being able to have that culture is mostly a function of size and growth. Like if you're small or you're still growing, then people are more optimized towards just doing great work because it'll be rewarded with headcount, say, or scope, which is something everyone seeks. Whereas once you kind of get to the point where a company's so big, people are like, we can't grow anymore. We can't just keep adding headcount, which happened actually during my time at Facebook. I think it was the first time they got to that point. And then there seems to be like a change in people's behavior in the organization. They become a little bit more elbows out, a little bit more fighty. Things get a little bit more political because they're negotiating, fighting for resources. It's funny, actually, there was a brilliant podcast by Brian Chesky on Lenny Richowski, I think his name is. Yeah. He actually talks a little bit about things getting political. Do you think that's true? And does that make it hard for people to... Saying don't give away your Legos in a time of like growth and easy head count and so on is very easy because it's all right, I'll just go and kill a job over here. We're at a time where everyone's elbows out. Do you think that can still hold true?
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I think what you describe is a natural phenomena in every company, whether it's a small startup or in a small startup, you might experience it at like an individual level.
Right.
In a large organization or a large company, you might experience it across like entire divisions. And it's actually a sign of some amount of health of the business. Let me flip it around for you. Like imagine a world where you're in a company and there's no existential crisis daily.
Right.
Where there's like a magic money printing machine. Okay, these are good times.
Right.
In good times, what do people do? They just like, they stay in their house, they mow the lawn, they watch watch the orchard grow. They're not out there looking for new lands because like they have everything they need. Naturally what happens in that environment is that people tend to maximize for internal growth because like the company construct is just like, it's just healthy and it's growing on its own. And so like if you want to establish yourself or your career, people tend to equate ladders, progression, titles, the number of people they have working for them as like the ways to measure themselves because the larger construct is not an existential crisis.
Right.
Now, oftentimes people say, okay, well, this will never happen in a startup because every day is a new and rewarding day of struggle against the open seas. But the truth is, people just have a slightly different way of equating what it means for them to progress in the world.
Yeah.
Progression for them is just like, let's survive the night.
Yeah.
Let's survive next month. Yeah. Let's get to 1 million ARR. Let's go to 10 million ARR.
Yeah.
It's just a slightly different version of progression. And so I actually think after living many different versions of this type of life, what I do is I try and look for the best in people in these times, which is, look, they're trying to strive. But their version of striving is equated to a place where maybe you don't have that urgent need to just focus on the basics, and so now they can extend beyond. And I think sometimes what really helps in those places is for leadership teams or founding teams to just get back to what does it actually mean to be in service of something greater, and reconnect back to a mission. Now there are going to be people you will find who will not do that. Yeah. And then that this is actually a bum thing, and you got to work hard to just help those people find the opportunities elsewhere. But it is actually and ironically, it's the sign of a healthy company when people can focus on other things than just surviving.
Yeah, true. Interesting. The scarcity, almost this sense of scarcity driving
That's right.
urgency.
That's right.
It's true in startups. I think even we were guilty of it. We raised our first money early in 21. People were just sending out term sheets at that point. It was around it very easy.
Yep.
And you see this runway. Yep. You're like, it's fine. We're going to chip away. We didn't ship quick enough. We could have shipped much faster. As it got towards that runway getting closer and closer, the urgency in the company went up. So we just raised now. We were talking about it.
Congrats.
Thank you. But the goal is now okay, how do we keep that sense of fear in everybody's eyes that this is, because we just do better work.
Yep.
Honestly, we just do better
exactly
work.
Right. I mean, so I think all of the places I've worked have the founders or the founding team or the leadership team have tried to keep that energy to prevent this.
Yeah.
I think. For good or bad, Microsoft gets a lot of this bad rap, but it's actually a very common phenomena. Microsoft wouldn't be in a position to have this problem if it wasn't one of the best businesses ever created in the history of humankind. Right? IBM wouldn't have these problems if it wasn't one of those innovators and what does it mean to have a computing device that powers your entire business. Meta wouldn't have this if its business of advertising could just basically keep everybody focused on just building features, and there's a little crew on the side just printing money. So I think a lot of these teams, a lot of the really great leaders, Bill, Satya, even Ballmer in his own way, definitely Mark Zuckerberg, Patrick Collison. Stripe has this. Patrick and John Collison, they have this very pithy statement that says, "We haven't won yet," which is a very polite Irish way of saying get back to work.
This is 1% done?
Exactly.
Similar thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
This is 1% done or whatever, right? Yeah. That's from Meta. Microsoft, I think, went through, Microsoft is a classic company where you can learn so many lessons from because it has experienced almost every facet of the tech industry. I think Microsoft really embraced internal competition to create.
Yes.
Because there really wasn't anything outside the company.
Right.
So imagine being a company that is so well off that you have to go to internal competition in order to get people to be at their best. An unfortunate side effect of that is you get a bunch of other, cultural
some
artifacts.
negative cultural side effects. But it's a good trade-off. Maybe it's a good trade-off.
I mean, there was two versions of databases. I worked on one, and many of my current coworkers at Stripe worked on the other one, and we laugh about it.
This was a famous Gates thing, right? He'd sort of set two teams up and kind of not tell them they're going head-to-head, but they're going head-to-head, and they both know it. And
exactly. You have to be careful. I mean, that's I think one of the subtle lessons that I'm sure that you're pulling out here in terms of culture. Whatever you decide to do, to tweak the culture, to establish a culture, will have an anti-pattern.
Side effects, like medicine, right?
Exactly.
If there's a cultural pill, there's going to be some side effects.
Absolutely.
Choose your side effects carefully.
Absolutely.
I think one of my favorite talks about this is Zuck on Masters of Scale. He's not necessarily talking about culture, but he's talking about every decision you make as an organization, move fast and break things. Had obvious trade-offs.
Great.
Things broke
Great
occasionally, but it's just the ultimate. He actually came up with a few in that podcast. It's great. Okay, let's talk about Brian Chesky again. Actually, so you're the first person on this show. I mean, Josh Williams, almost product manager. I don't know what he is. Data scientist, engineer.
It's great to be a unicorn.
Yeah, he is pretty special. Vijay's more engineering background. Rajiv, more engineering background. You're more PM background. So let's do some PM stuff.
Yep.
And, fairly topical. We'll do the OpenAI thing later. But was Brian Chesky's recent... so the story of this went, I think he at a TechCrunch event or something?
I think it was like Figma, which is like a very designy.
Figma, that's it, yeah.
Designy, event, I think.
And he made some statement that the crowd of designers perceived as him saying, we're getting rid of the product management function. Turns out that's not what he was saying.
Yeah.
I mean, have you heard the story? Have you heard his take on this? I'm really curious on your take as a PM about can you help describe that you think the changes you think he's making there and whether it makes sense in your view?
Yeah, I think a lot of this stuff, the nuance is lost in the broad internet.
Right.
And, there's a lot of cookie cutter advice or, entire factories of wisdom that gets taken out of context.
Sure.
That built out of taken out of context things. I think if you kind of zoom in a little bit on Brian, you zoom in on Airbnb, their business and their product is quite different than your classic software thing.
Sure.
As much as it's a technology company, it's actually like a hospitality business.
Yeah.
And it's a hospitality business that's built on anybody being able to be a part of the platform that they've created. And so curating this thing to have the best possible experience when you don't really own the random nodes that add to the network. It's actually more similar to the Meta of the world than a hotel, right?
Right.
And so Meta, as much as it Meta and Twitter and everybody else who is a broad news distribution network, but they don't actually write any of the articles, but yet everybody goes there for the news. And of course, all the consequences that come as a part of that versus being the New York Times, which is a highly curated, highly editorialized view of the world.
Yeah.
These are two radically different things, but they're kind of the same product.
Yeah.
I think so if you look at the competition or the market for what Airbnb is doing, it's giving everybody the chance to be participating in the hospitality business.
Yeah.
Now, hotels increasingly have just fought it by just being curated experiences. And increasingly, especially in the last 2 years post-pandemic, you've heard this narrative of Airbnb is taking and destroying neighborhoods. The economic value of Airbnb is not clear. Why should cities support Airbnbs? It's clear value to the host, but even the hosts are not complaining. Oh, the algorithm is not rewarding us with more visits. Sounds very familiar to Meta.
It does,
right?
yeah.
And hotels, meanwhile, are just we're just going to keep on being better at hospitality. So increasingly, the more Airbnb got stronger, hotels responded by just doing the thing that they were supposed to be doing anyway, which is just improving the quality.
Yeah.
And of course, it's really hard to compete with a bunch of hotels that just hospitality is their DNA.
Right.
And so in that context, you look at it and you're okay, so if I hire a bunch of quote unquote product managers that just think their job is to work on the app, you are fooling yourself. Even if you if you hire designers and you think the job is to just work on the design of the app, you're fooling yourself. And I know they did a refresh of the app and everything else, but the real thing is somehow to get these amazing experiences to pop out of nowhere on this platform with nodes of their own control. Now, how do you do that? Is that a product management job? Well, it's kind of like a marketing job too.
Right.
Sometimes you have to represent a curated experience when none exists, or at least curtail these merchants, or what do you want to call them?
Yeah.
Not merchants, hosts and
guests, I think,
hosts
is the two sides, yeah.
You have to get these hosts to a place where they can, on your behalf, Airbnb's behalf, be competitive with the hotels of the world. Now, that is a very radically different shaped role.
Yeah.
Than what I would classically describe as product management.
Right.
And so I think it's perfect for Brian Chesky to question, well, why should you have a traditional structure where you have design, you have PM, you have PMM, when really a lot of the work here is to turn things upside down in a very competitive marketplace where your competition are business owners who really understand what it's like to be a hotelier or a hospitality business.
Yeah.
If I had the choice of Airbnb in India or the Taj hotels, I'll pick the Taj hotels every day of the week.
Interesting.
And I'll tell you why. Because the Taj hotels have a reputation which is like so ingrained that says like hospitality is the number one thing you go there for.
Right.
Like it really is it's beyond service. Now, no Airbnb, no matter what you could put on your Airbnb app, is going to compete with that. And so how do you like uplift and compete in that zone?
Yeah.
Is that a product management traditional, like a product manager just comes in and writes a spec or does something for the app? Boy, that's not going to result in the outcome that you want. Product marketing in general is more market oriented.
Yeah.
And so if like the market is really the product that you're supposed to control and curate, you might as well get your PMs closer to the market.
So you really think it's just about bringing those functions, I mean, that's kind of what he described, right? Bringing those functions close together. That's what he said afterwards. You don't see this then, based on what you've just said, it sounds like you don't see this being something that everyone's going to copy. You don't see like Stripe, for example, in a rush, merging the two functions into one.
No, absolutely not. I think so much of it's like you're the expert here, but like you have so many problems as a business, as a founder, as a startup to take on.
Yeah.
And Airbnb is like beyond a startup now. They're tweaking every single thing in your company and innovating on every single axis is like a mistake. You have to like pick and choose.
Yeah.
The majority of the things you should just copy.
Yeah.
And so if I think about that and I'm like, okay, well, you look at every tech company out there, like really they're going to sit back and do the hard thinking like Brian did on like, what's my market? What's my thing? What's my actual product? How do I force this change in my company? No, they're just going to copy what does it mean to have like the 90% case of great PMs. Yeah. And so I think PMs are fine for a long time. It's not an issue. But it's like the situation in Airbnb is very, very unique.
It is an interesting business. I sometimes think for us, if we, I don't know how soon we'd be hiring product managers, but we're so focused on developer experience. So we use that word experience, but I think it's very different to Airbnb, right? Just the whole setup. That I often think we want folks with a very strong design mentality, like product design, almost like industrial design kind of skills in that world.
Yeah.
I don't see a world where a future Zooplo is merging the marketing and the PM function. Actually, probably design and PM would be closer together.
Totally.
It's hard though, because then you just created this like unicorn of, it's hard enough finding PMs, right? And marketing people.
It is tricky. I mean, it's tricky. I think so Microsoft, again, speaking of Microsoft kind of like invented the PM discipline. Right. And it came out of like sheer necessity. Yeah. And again, in the context of Microsoft, where again, you had this like amazing unthrottled opportunity in business, so strong, it had incredible stickiness. And you could argue that there's like an incredible channel and business acumen from Bill Gates on how to get that done, the Wintel duopoly, all that stuff. Yep. In that context, the most important thing was to build the next feature, to make sure the trains run on time, because you had like physical software being sent to like print on disks that then got manufactured or like sent out for manufacturing. It was like kind of like a physical good system. And so if you had a delay, boy, you destroyed like years of revenue. Yeah. Even in like a month delay. And so at Microsoft, even when I joined there, like the most important thing was to ship on time. And you would do unnatural, ungodly things. Yeah. Microsoft had war rooms. What were war rooms for? It was like you'd be curtailing the bugs with the number of fixes to get to a point of zero bug bounce. You remember those like old terms? Yeah, ZBB. ZBB. Yeah. Until you got to a point where you're like confident enough to like stamp the disk. And then immediately as you stamp the disk, you start working on the service packs. Wow. And so like in that world, it's not sufficient to just have engineers just be great product engineers. You needed to like run
a tight program.
So you had program management. And actually, if you were to ask the question, which is like, how do you make the trains run on time? You could say, well, there's somebody in there called the release managers banging on the table, which they did have. But more importantly, how do you get as crisp of a requirements thing figured out so that you only build the right thing and you don't like have feature creep? Yeah. Right? Like feature creep was a word that has been in taxonomy, invented at Microsoft. Yeah. So like you go upstream as much as possible. So program management went as close to the customer to get to definition, which allowed development under constrained windows and milestones.
Just a much more waterfall process, honestly, is what you're kind of describing, right?
That's right.
I've kind of forgotten about it. I mean, I joined Microsoft as just before the launch of Azure.
You're right.
BPOS was just getting started, which was your first Office subscription thing, right? Yep. Very early. So I didn't see it as much, and I was over in the field in the UK at that point. But you did see hints of that. And that was one of the biggest shifts going to Facebook, which grew up its DNA was in this world where bits are cheap, right? Like, there used to be a lot of talk about software architecture, and there'd be arguments about, is architecture the right paradigm? It's clearly not today, because you can like literally take out the third floor and put something else in, which you couldn't if you were printing discs and like literally shipping them around the world.
That's why it mattered.
It was like industrial. It's like building hardware almost, really.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why there's a lot of people love to throw. I think they threw a lot of stones at Microsoft during the years where like the iPhone was exploding and all this stuff was going on. But I think like clearly Microsoft being I think the second most valuable company in the world right after Apple, shows you that something happened there, or a set of things happened there that made it like so resilient and foundationally strong. The converse argument to like the type of engineering that you're describing there is like, imagine the amount of like hardcore engineers and PMs and like architects and field people, sellers. Like if you could imagine what a customer needed 3 years before they needed it, that is like a superpower that most companies in the world B2B don't have. And they would like kill to have that power. And so whenever, especially like a company like Stripe, which is learning to like go towards enterprise, it's like Microsoft is the ideal company to mimic, to learn from. Because imagine doing work for 3 years when you've already been paid for it by your customer. And that's what Microsoft's genius is. And architects to like PM to everybody else is like so strong there.
And the account team just as another superpower.
Brilliant go to market.
Okay, and all hail King Satya. He's just like king of the world right now, right? Okay, let's jump ahead a little bit. So Rajiv, when he was on here last, he recommended you as a guest, and he said something very specific. He said you can motivate teams to do the impossible. So that's a very important sort of cultural leadership thing. So tell us more. Like what does that look like, and what are some of the tools and techniques you use to do that?
First of all, very generous for my good friend Rajiv. He and I worked on Office 365 together. That's where we spent a lot of time. We worked at Meta together on Marketplace. I think I think like one thing I've learned over time is, nothing is really as difficult as it seems. And the job of a leader, whether you're like an IC leader or you're a people leader of a large team, I think like the fundamental job is to help people recognize that where they are now is not what they could be, and to close that distance. For me in particular, I just always try and remind myself to work in that way. So for example, if I go around and say, "Oh gosh, this is just too hard." First of all, I can't say it. I just can't do it.
No.
It's actually really important to like model the type of behavior you want everybody else to, and like to live it. And so, if it means, like rolling up your sleeves and doing the math to figure out whether something is actually the right thing to go do, instead of just delegating it. You should do that because it means like you're actually doing the hard work required to build the conviction that something is possible. I think one of the very often related dangerous management habits is to be like, okay, well, just set dangerously bold goals. And I have found that almost naturally, like that works for a limit, and then after that, it starts collapsing under its own weight. I think the better way to do it is to get people to realize that they're capable of more. And there are many ways to do that, but the number one way that I like to do it is to just live the personal philosophy myself, so that people can see that I'm just not just demanding them to like come up to work and just do things out of bravado, or like because I'm an exec and I get to tell people what to do. I think that actually makes the biggest difference for me. So, I remember in the data center days, which is when, Rajiv and I worked together, asking people to carry a pager in a company that was used to printing discs was a really big shift culturally, and it's painful. Like, how do you get people to be on call when they have no idea what on call even means? It turns out I was incident manager for like 3 years in a row, every weekend. Wow. I never had and then Rajiv joined, and Rajiv was helpfully incident manager. But for the longest time, it was 3 or 4 of us that was taking calls from pagers. Picking up the pager call from the service breaking down. And technically I'm a PM, but like being able to log into the service and like reboot a bunch of servers or restart services, like I took the pain. It was painful, but getting people to imagine a world where they could become a service company rather than a software company, requires you to do the work.
It's interesting. I think whenever I come across a big statement like this, like motivating teams to do the impossible, sounds this big lofty, should be in a neon sign, right? The answers always boil down to these really simple things. Like, just get in there and roll your sleeves up and do the work with people and be part of it. And,
it's true.
Lead by doing. The cheesy meme I'm reminded of is the one with a leader and a boss.
Yeah.
And the leader's in front walking with the troops, right? And the boss is the guy sat in a chair being dragged by the people. I mean, I'm sure that's not what you want me to say, but it really what you're saying makes me think of that.
That's exactly right. And the thing is, I think the increase, I have tried and made a bunch of mistakes where you just like demand so much.
Yeah.
And like demanding culture is like a thing in the tech industry, and it's a lot of like memes around it. There's like grind culture. There's a lot of like what I would call like very toxic memes in the tech industry. Whereas if you actually like pour back to like the folks who have built our industry, and a lot of them aren't on Twitter, let's say, or Threads now. Threads is awesome. My Meta friends, I love Threads. A lot of those folks, they really built people as much as they built products. And they built organizations with resilience. They built the next batch of leaders that came after them. And I remember them more than anybody else because they were the ones who like enabled like you and I to do what we're doing. And so in some ways, as a person who has reasonable influence over a large portion of people's daily lives, I feel like it's my responsibility to not let them down.
Yeah.
And it's actually like a really serious responsibility. I learned this from Deb Liu, which she actually named it for me, which was this idea of servant leadership.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And it really puts you in a different mind frame. It's like, it's easy to shoot off a note in the middle of the night being like, can you come tomorrow morning and present this to me? It's a different thing to be like, okay, first of all, I'm not going to do that in the middle of the night.
Yep.
Because I'm just like ruining somebody's night.
Yep.
I'm going to wait. I'm going to see if like my own mind changes.
Right.
And it often does.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just like call them up and brainstorm with them and involve them in the process instead of demanding things of them. And it turns out more often than not, like, gosh, they're like at the verge of the same realization that I might have because I have a broader purview.
Yeah.
And then it's just like a simple conversation to nudge somebody, and then they feel empowered.
There's so much more enlisted in the process.
Not just enlisted, like you learn because you have more information than just having a large purview. And so I feel like that has been the most dramatic change for me personally in my career.
That is awesome, actually. A lot for me to think about there. I think you're going to have to do a follow-up chat on this, I think, at some point. So the next question I want to ask, actually, it was a little bit hinted at in the Brian Chesky interview with Lenny. I feel I'm seeing this change during ZIRP, or zero interest rate phenomenon, and infinite engineers, and before Musk started firing all of Twitter, and folks were like, oh, interesting, I think we can run with much fewer people. Engineers were so in demand, or tech staff in general, like PMs as well, was so in demand. There seemed to be a bit of a swing toward they were running the asylum a little bit more than the managers. And in that world, there was certainly a lot of excitement around the idea of bottoms-up engineering.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a big thing when I arrived at Facebook. And it was real, actually. Like, I came from Microsoft, where I've said this before. At Microsoft, I felt like when I was there was a lot more scaffolding. There was kind of like a VP, had a vision, and you were sort of executing on some part of it. I landed at Facebook on the Facebook analytics team. It was almost like, hey, so you've got these like 20 or so people. What are you doing with them? Like, impress us now so you get to keep them.
Exactly.
I have to like come up with things. I'm not just like choosing the shape of the buttons and so on.
Yep.
So that was a very bottoms up culture in my experience. I'm feeling like there's a bit of a shift away from that in the industry at the moment, and things getting a little bit more top down. Rajiv talked about a mix in his answer. Vijay also talked about, vision being set top down. Brian talks about him being in the details. He's not going to hire a CPO.
Right.
He originally, he was getting complaints about when he got involved, things went slower.
Right.
And in hindsight, he feels that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Like, it may have felt like it, but really just on analysis running both ways. He's getting more in the details. What's your take on what's going on? Is the pendulum swinging back? Are we making a correction towards the right place?
The questions are like, the answers you're going to get to this question is going to be very, very biased by like where people sit in the hierarchy.
Right.
Like, it'd be insane if Vijay or Rajiv gave you an answer that was bottoms up. Because, frankly, like, they're never going to be able to pull that off to get to like the larger purview. Like, they're, like Vijay and Rajiv see investors. Yeah. Investors don't talk to ICs on the team. Right. And there's probably some like, same with you. It's like you're interfacing with your board. Yeah. A regular person on your team, no matter how capable they are, aren't going to have that like visibility or insight into like different mechanics of a complex business. And so you'll get, first of all, you're just going to get different answers to this. I think like one thing that I've thought about this a little bit over time. There's like two things I would say, two observations. One is the really savvy people match like the company culture towards the way that the incentives of a company naturally get people to do the right thing. And so here's an example. At Meta, the super empowered engineer who can just write a line of code and improve something works really well for the business construct and the value exchange that Facebook family of apps have with their users, with their consumers, and also advertisers and stuff. Perfect example is this. Because the relationship between monetization and engagement is so tightly coupled that nobody has to really think about it, the vast majority of the workforce at Meta can be unthrottled to just increase engagement. Okay? And like the incentives are very aligned because like basically the ads group and the finance team and the business owners can be like, great, let's have everybody just go increase engagement. Okay. There's a magic thing, the ads engine that will take that engagement. And of course the ads team will optimize it some more and create new formats and stuff and figure out tooling for advertisers. But holy cow, like you don't have to have the majority of the people think about all these different ways of making money. And in that world, the best thing you can possibly do is just get people randomly writing code that well-tested, A/B tested, whatever, build intuition on products, and just go nuts.
An engagement experiment farm, basically.
Right. And actually, that's why Meta is such a data-driven company, because in that really unthrottled, brilliant world of every empowered person, you need to give them something to constrain like dangerous things from happening. And guess what that is? That's data. And so like you get two things from Meta which are very, very potent. You get people who have really strong product intuition around engagement, and you have really strong ability for people to guardrail themselves with data. And that, in that world, the bottoms-up stuff works brilliantly until disaster happens. Right. And then you're like, okay, guess what? The engagement thing is not working. When you have 0 to 1 things, 0 to 1 is very hard at a company like that. Yeah. Because you can't actually, because that formula doesn't work anymore. No. Yeah. Right? And so 0 to 1 is like, we were at Meta and people would always say, it's better to buy. Because it's hard to invent from scratch in that world. You take a company like Microsoft, and actually Microsoft is in many ways very, very top down because the business artifact and the commitments we have with enterprise customers are like golden contracts. Right. And you can't have randomness in the universe. And the marketing machinery and all the go-to-market actually determines how the company's incentive should be aligned. And so you seem to have much more of like, okay, well, Teams is now going to add voice. It's not like somebody says, hey, let's add voice. Right. Why? Because the market, there's a gap, there's a monetization scheme around it, there's a competitive like lag, let's call it. And that's like much more prescriptive. And so I think like that is I think that's kind of like the bigger insight on some of these things. Again, like the Airbnb example, it's like, look, I'm not sure if everybody's clued into Airbnb what the business they're in, but Brian certainly knows. And I think being a little bit more top down on what that means to compete in that really diverse market isn't a broadcast job like Meta, where it's like just focus on engagement.
Right, drive this one thing. It's just never that. It's rarely that simple, actually. It's very rarely that simple. It's very nuanced, right?
It is very nuanced. And so like I think Meta is like a very far example of it. But if you think about like Reality Labs, it doesn't quite work in that way. Because it's like, how are you going to get a random engineer to build a hardware device that gets stapled onto your, you know what I mean? Like it just...
Sorry, Reality Labs is the VR, metaverse stuff.
That's right. Thanks for correction. The AR, VR, like this is hardware commitments you have to make for like a 5-year journey just huge. To get the optics to the right place.
Yeah.
Boy, that's like you're going to get a hardware leader from Apple, let's call it, who knows how to manage, distribution centers and production facilities. You're going to get an optics expert.
Yeah.
And they're going to like grind this problem down. It's not a grassroots thing.
No.
And by the way, the chutzpah required to like make a commitment like that is not an organic thing that comes from the below. Like nobody stands up and says, hey, Mark, just give me $1 billion. We are going to spend it building software and hardware that is going to be delivered in 10 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's clearly a thing that comes top down.
Yeah. Wish I'd had this conversation with you when I was working on 0 to 1 at Facebook. Okay, what a great answer. I love it. So talking about culture, I asked Rajiv this. When you're at Stripe now, actually, we didn't overlap. We missed each other. Stripe has a culture.
Yeah.
It's quite different to Facebook in my take. Maybe we'll have time to talk about that. But then when you come as a leader, though, you're a business lead, probably a pretty decent sized organization. What are the cultural constants that you're always going to get? If you hire Vivek Sharma, what comes as a non-negotiable part of that package?
That's helpful because I just finished my year at Stripe. For me, like no matter where I go, I really focus on a couple of things, which is you have to figure out who do you serve and what are the steps to make sure that you are doing a better than expected job for them. And so at Stripe, for example, it's like the mission of the company is to raise the GDP of the internet. Right. My particular group focuses on inside of companies. Like, you're running a company now. Boy, wait till tax season. It's going to be painful. Actually, it might not be, but hopefully, if it is painful, you'll come talk to us. But the reason, like a lot of software exists, is to get rid of like the problems that human beings shouldn't have to spend time on. That's like the original like conceit of software.
Sure, yeah.
Like the idea of automation. Now, increasingly with AI and everything else, we're moving to a place where it's like, okay, like why should we just focus on efficiency? We should be focusing on things like growth. And so my team builds software that helps company generate more revenue, very simply. But it took me a year to be able to like say that statement. Why? Because I had to like dig through the morass of like, what does exist in the market? People have billing software, tax software. Well, what does that do? Is it just like a line item in your accounting things? That's what I thought coming natively. But like, you spend time with customers and you're like, no, actually what they really want to do is to get rid of all this stuff and focus on the things that makes them money.
Yeah.
Business models. Yep. Are you a subscriber? Are you going to sell magazines? Are you going to do digital copies? Are you going to like have contracts or invoice? I mean, like this is like the heart of the beast, is to make revenue for a business. Like who I serve, what am I doing for them? And then it's like, okay, well, why shouldn't the mission be make every company make 50% more revenue after using our software?
It's a big, bold goal.
That's insane.
Right.
But it ladders up to like that mission of the company.
Yeah.
Like how can you raise the GDP of the internet if you can't actually make every business make more money?
Yeah.
And so like for me, like that journey, the reason why it's a year is because I'm bringing my whole team along to get to a point where we can stand up and say, no, actually, no. And our job isn't just to like sell you billing software. Our job is to make it so that you are making 10% more money every year. And our goal is to get to like 50% more revenue by the time you're done working with us. And that's like, now when I talk to customers, their eyes are like, yes.
That's what I want.
That's what I want.
To go back to the original question, like the cultural constant you bring, it is this sort of analysis of like really understanding who do you serve. And by that, you don't mean as a leader. You don't mean as like the people. You mean as the customer or the end consumer of the thing you're shipping as a team.
Yeah. Who do you ultimately serve? Like, who do you serve? And like in this case, it's really easy to say, okay, well, we have accounting teams.
Yeah.
No, that's not it.
Yeah.
What is the job of a business?
Yeah.
The job of a business is to first survive. Second, take care of their own customers. And third, thrive.
Yeah.
Who do we serve? We serve the business. That's maybe not like aperture-wise for a traditional PM sense specific enough, but every single customer that I talk to, I can find the person very easily who's responsible for, the three things I talk. First, survive.
Yeah.
Second, take care of their customers. And third, thrive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it's the CEO. Sometimes the CFO. Sometimes it's just like a line engineer who just gives a lot of care.
So I think this is the other part that he didn't answer before about how he gets people to do impossible things, actually, is like setting a good vision. That's far, what you've just described is I'm far more excited about, not just your customers, I'm far more excited about it if I was to come and work for you than some accounting software. So, it's like, that's cool.
Exactly.
So I think that's another big one. Let's talk about Stripe culture versus the other places then.
Yeah.
I wasn't there super long, but some observations for me, it was very written, heavy written culture, heavy reading. That felt like it kind of came, I don't mean top down in the same way, but it came from the founder, Patrick, who, have you seen his reading list that he has on the internet?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so long,
very smart,
I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I would describe Stripe, I've given it some thinking. Stripe, I think people mistake its superpower. Stripe, and it'll answer your question on the documents a little bit.
Yeah.
Stripe is people say it's like a technical company, it's a payments company, blah, blah. No, Stripe is ultimately a very earnest company. It's very earnest. And there's like the earnestness comes from the founders. An example of earnestness is like, you'll go to Patrick and you'll be like, okay, well, this is how this thing is going to come together. And he'll be like, but why is it that it's going to come together like this? Why can't we do X and Y? Now, I think the casual observer will be like, well, this is a demanding CEO or founder. No, but like if you look in the Irish background, it's just like earnestness. It's like, really tell me, like, why can't we do better? And I think that translates very much into an organization that really takes earnestness to its end zone, which is to like describe the why nots and whys to an extent where you have to kind of like imagine all those questions, all those whys being answered before you're ready for execution. But I think increasingly, I think people are learning to translate the earnestness into like, no, let's earnestly solve the problem in chunks.
Right.
Let's iterate our way through it. And so I think organizations learn very much from their founders, and they misinterpret quite a bit from their founders. You know what I mean? They do. Like Bill Gates we talked about this. Let's put teams at each other. Yeah. Why? Because competition is scarce and we got to keep ourselves up and agile. But instead, what people end up doing is what? Just like one-upping each other. Yeah. And forgetting the market. I'm not sure Bill was like, ignore the market, just fight.
Yeah.
So it's like similarly to Patrick. It's just like earnestly find solutions, go beyond, like dig deeper. And people like, I think, translate that to this, trying to articulate as much as they possibly can.
Okay, so a lot of folks ask me about books and favorite books. And I know you're a fairly well-read person, so hit me with your top 3 recommendations.
I've got 2 good ones. Okay. And I think in the spirit of the discussion we're having, one of them is actually I don't know which college or which school this person is from, but he's a doctor of philosophy. He wrote this book called The Good Life. And it's a modern interpretation of meditations, which is Marcus Aurelius' famous writings.
Great book.
But the reason why I think this one is more recommended is because it's a lot more digestible to like the modern human.
That is a hard book to read.
It is a hard book to read.
But it's hard.
Yeah. So The Good Life, I would recommend like just like the first couple of chapters. Don't have to read the whole thing. The reason why I recommend it is I think a lot of folks, especially in the tech industry where things are moving so fast and so easy to do like comparison shopping. You know what I mean? Like it's a thing. Yeah. If you're worried about your career, don't be worried about it because like we're all living magical lives. I mean, apparently AI is now available, I guess. So like that really helped me kind of compartmentalize from the day-to-day work. For example, you mentioned about the Stripe docs thing, or at Meta I only wrote 1 note because
Is that right?
Yeah, I just can't like. I just don't have it in me to kind of like follow the same path. But part of that requires you to build some like confidence that you're going to be okay. no matter what. And I think that book is really good for the Western mind. For the Indian community, I would recommend something else, but for the Western mind, I recommend that book. For the Eastern mind, it's really Buddhist philosophy too.
Yeah. Okay.
Not attachment.
Yeah.
Being a Stoic is very similar to being. I was a religious studies major earlier.
Okay. I wonder where that was coming from.
Yeah.
Interesting. No, I'm going to read this.
It's really good. It's really good. Yeah.
I do you know, actually, I think it's very impressive. I don't think folks watching will get how big a thing that is for someone. You were pretty senior at Facebook.
Yeah.
And writing notes was kind of the lingua franca, honestly. If you didn't have a couple of hit notes that were like top 10s,
you
were a nobody.
Yeah, that's true.
And you were definitely not a nobody, so you kind of snuck under the radar there, which I think must have took a lot of steel, really, from you to plow your career and not do that.
Yeah, and same thing with, it's a little bit of an odd thing. It's like sometimes in order to find that inner strength, you have to do things your own way.
Yeah.
And then you have to believe that doing it in your own way either will teach you enormous lessons, which it certainly will, or it'll see you through. See you through as in it'll be good for you.
And probably the other thing, which is such a common trope, you were kind of willing to fail, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Anna works, oh well, it's all right, I'll fail.
Yeah.
I'll go do something else.
But I can tell you, it's definitely not something that's it required work. And that's why I'm recommending this book.
Yeah, okay.
But, good thing I started off as a religious studies major.
There you go.
Because either you believe in the afterlife or you don't. Second book is, this one actually I think I would recommend to anybody who is watching the technological changes around us, and in specific is trying to think of ways to engage your users, your customers. It's kind of an odd recommendation, but there's a book called The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity.
Yep.
It's a beautiful book. It's like a big orange cover.
Yep.
By David Wengro. And the reason why I recommend that book is because it very simply and very beautifully dissects the common notions that the apex of human society has been, modern governing, where what you really realize after reading that book is actually human beings self-organize all the time. They have tribal nature. They will humans have been experimenting with radical forms of self-governance. If it sounds familiar, it sounds kind of like what happened in that weird zone in the crypto world where everybody was creating DAOs, and you're even the OpenAI thing, as wacky as it's been, people are wow, this radical structure where the governing authority has no equity and no whatever in a commercial entity. It's not that strange. If you read the book, you're actually the Hittites were creating governing bodies that were more interesting than what we're doing today. And so it kind of opens your eyes that as much as the technological changes are going on around us, people fundamentally have been doing very interesting things for a long time. And sometimes our job as technologists not to say, oh my God, technology is going to change everything. It's just to adapt to the ways that people have been doing things for a long, long time. Airbnb is another example. Which is actually people have been hosting each other in their houses for a long time.
Yeah.
They really have.
Yeah.
If somebody added a nice commercial model over it.
Yeah, now there's an internet thing doing it, but otherwise,
right?
Yeah, it might be happening a bit more, but
happening a bit more.
Yeah.
So I think those are the two that I.
Those are great. Didn't finish The Dawn of.
It's a thick book.
Yeah, it's a thick book. I'm terrible at finishing books, but I like the fact we start with A Good Life, which I think is true of so many books. Is you probably only need to read the first few chapters. So many business books are there are obviously some you got to write a 600-page book, otherwise we can't sell it, and so they write the book in 100 pages, and then they just elaborate at the end. So many great business books you don't need to finish. I don't think actually you get the core principles pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's one of the books that that's similar in that nature, and it's just a lightweight recommendation, but I thought it was really good. Was who do you want your customer to become? I think it's not exactly the title, but it's a different variant of this whole jobs to be done thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The jobs to be done thing is I think overused and misunderstood quite a bit. The who do you want your customer to become is actually a really, really simple way of figuring out what's the right thing to go do. Yeah. Which is, instead of imagining what problem needs to be solved, imagine what's the transformation
that you want to create.
Yeah, that you want to create for the customer, or and for social and consumer products, it becomes the hero's journey. It's do you want them to be proud of their budding photography skills to allow them to post on this thing where they get kudos from their friends and family called Instagram. It's like a different way. It's like, what's the job to be done would be like, oh my God, they have social pressure.
Yeah.
But who do you want them to become is like more of a positive light.
Right.
Which is like, actually, maybe they're amateur, maybe become pro.
The title of the book, that might not be accurate, you said.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the notes and we'll fix it.
A good follow-up.
But even that is just a good question to ask, right? Like the title is actually quite useful on its own. Yep. All right, really quick now, we'll get you away. We're holding you back from your Thanksgiving weekend here. So fast fire now. From Josh Williams, and I don't know what this means. Why don't you answer emails?
Because most people expect too much from each other, and we should just be like a little bit lax in things.
So what does that mean in real world? Is that you will answer some emails, you never answer any? You see it like a Twitter stream, like you're a non-completionist, basically?
Yeah, well, this is one of those like modeling example things. Like I don't want everybody to be responsive all the time.
Okay.
I just don't.
Yeah, okay.
I don't demand that of myself, and so why should I demand that of other people? And so it's a very simple technique for me to just like add some lag in the world. And often I don't respond because I'm just like, I'd rather talk to you about it, so come talk to me.
Yeah.
But I find that a lot of async and like slacky communications are very like self-destructive.
Yeah, there's someone that was a guy called Adine Gajar. I don't know if you met him. He worked at Facebook.
Yeah, you know, he's great. Yeah.
What did he call it? He talked about like Messenger is what we used internally, or work chat, I think it became, and email being non-completionist, like Twitter. I just dip in and out the stream,
totally.
And then
I think that's exactly right.
If there's enough noise, they'll shout at me and I'll come deal with it.
Well, and actually this is one of those subtle things, which is like, you have to, as a worker in the modern economy, you have to regain your power. You really do. Yeah. As much as me, a manager, would want my folks to be all productive all the time, like as an individual and human in the spirit of this, new dawn of humanity, or whatever that book title was, I really should like regain some power. And it's okay to like not do things that other people ask you to do. It's okay. It's okay to say no. It's okay to slack once in a while. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to go on vacation. It's okay to go play with your kids instead of like doing X and Y for work. Yeah. And not just okay. I highly recommend it because it's healthy. Yeah, the good life.
Yeah. Okay, I love it. What a happy, positive note to end on. That's beautiful.
Exactly.
So I will. Although it's the opposite to Boz. I think Boz is very like you shall reply to all emails and do so quickly and like be in it. So he has a slightly different take there. I'm more your school on this actually, as my team will vouch for. Last one. Okay, this is the tradition now. So who should I invite next on the show, and what should I ask them?
Actually, I'm going to surprise you with two recommendations.
Two people?
Yeah, two people. These are folks who have the privilege of working more recently in my career.
Okay.
First one is Nitika Bansal, and she's the head of engineering for all of payments at Stripe, which I think is like a really big job.
It's huge.
And, she's in Seattle. You should catch up, get coffee. The other person is Charmine Chap, who recently joined Stripe, but she was previously at Meta and Twitch. And I think just like contrasting, and also just all the folks that you've already, great folks you've brought on, like people that have gone from like consumer to business to like some very specialist zones like payments, I think are fascinating stories to tell. For Nitika, for example, worked on like the series of Google voice communication things like Allo and Hello, and I'm not sure how many that they've killed. And so she has like amazing stories to tell on how Google tried many, many times. The communicator type apps that Google had.
The different chat apps, you mean?
And how many, they've probably killed more apps than they've had succeed, Google, but like amazing stories from that experience and learnings, and of course on Stripe. And then Charmine was at Twitch, which is just like a unique phenomena in the universe. Nobody has recreated that. And it just came out of nowhere.
Yeah. You kind of tried, right? You did some Twitch sort of like stuff.
Facebook Gaming did it. And it's like, so I have like deep respect for people who made Twitch, Twitch. So I think both of them would be fascinating.
Okay. Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in, Vivek. This is really awesome, actually. I love it especially when I get some notes which are for me. I'm like, oh yeah, this is something I really want to think about.
I appreciate it.
So,
no, it's great to catch up, and I just love everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks. Awesome.